Okay, I hope you can all hear me now. And firstly, I'd like to thank you all for attending. And I'm assuming that all of you that are attending are doing Challenge Denmark, or maybe one of the other challenge series that we've just started sponsoring. With me on the line is Mikkel Borbe as well, who's our MD basically in Europe, 32GI, and he's actually based in Denmark. And if there are any questions around the race day fueling, etc., I know the race director is going to be making it a little bit more clearer with the newsletters going out to anybody that is attending. But we do have an idea of what is going to be on course, and also when at which stages these products will also be served. So I think one thing about 32GI is that we don't just focus on what's going on race day. We try to educate and teach people how to actually prepare properly for endurance events. And so this presentation is really going to touch on a number of things, not just race day fueling, but also in preparing yourself that you get to race day in great condition. I mean, any ultra distance triathlon it takes a lot of toll on the body, and nutrition plays a very critical role. We are recording this presentation, so if for some reason you need to step off, or if somebody's late in coming onto the presentation as well, we will make this presentation available across our social media sites, the YouTube channel, and hopefully it will also be uploaded as well to the Challenge Denmark site. Okay, so let's get started. This is just an agenda and introduction I've basically done. I'm going to be speaking about daily nutrition considerations and training and nutrition considerations, and then talking about the taper period. We'll also speak a little bit about 32GI fueling, how we conceptualize fueling, and then we'll talk a little bit about Challenge Denmark on-course nutrition. And then if anybody's got any questions, we'll be able to hopefully answer them at the end. So just a mild introduction. My name is Mark Wolff. I am one of the founders of 32GI, and I am a sports nutrition expert and an endurance athlete. And basically, I've been working for many years in the industry, specifically focused on nutrition, and obviously assisting whether elite, professional, or amateur athletes in trying to help them achieve their goals. And my focus is not just on the training side, but predominantly also on the nutrition side, and tying the two together very nicely. And every person is different. Not one person is the same as the next, so everybody requires different nutrition requirements. One of the biggest questions that I get asked is how one should eat before, during, and after a training or a racing session. And before we even touch on the training aspect, I think the most critical aspect is to actually talk about daily nutrition, because this does play a critical role in performance. And I always tell my athletes, it doesn't matter how fit, fast, or strong you are, even if you already stand on a podium, if you're not eating correctly, you're not fulfilling your full potential. And this is something that I stress over and over again. Nutrition plays a very vital role in sports performance. Just some considerations which to me are very critical, and one of the things that I always tell people is that you should always eat foods that agree with you. It's very simple to tell what foods do agree with you and what foods don't. There are many athletes, for example, that are lactose intolerant, yet they still drink milk. If you react badly to a food, whether it's bloatedness, gas, whether it's allergy driven, you need to listen to those messages. You need to eliminate those foods in your diet that do cause issues. One of the other considerations is actually meal timing, and a lot of people actually miss time meals when they eat for energy. Some people skip meals, some people eat too few meals, and some people select the wrong foods at the wrong times when it comes to proper nutrition. And you need to understand for your particular body and for the type of sport that you're doing, what kind of macros need to be consumed in the form of protein, carbohydrates, and fats, and at what stages and what times during the day. And if you're not familiar with that, we're always there to guide you, but at the same time, any sports nutritionist would be able to assist you and help you break down those macros in order to make sure that you benefit from proper timed meals. Indulgence in stimulant foods, this close to Challenge Denmark, it's not very far away, only a couple of weeks. You should be reducing it significantly, and that means cutting out alcohol, cutting out the sugars and the chocolates and the sweets. A lot of people that are doing ultra distance triathlons tend to train very hard, put in a lot of volume hours, tend to succumb to sugar cravings and low blood sugar and start to eat the wrong types of foods. These are what I call indulgence and stimulant foods, and you should try and reduce them as much as possible. I'm not saying cut them out completely, but make sure that it's a very, very small percentage of what you're consuming on a daily basis. It is a percentages game, so just something that I always tell people is that if you're eating 60 meals a week and 50 meals of that is pretty healthy meals, well then the higher percentage of your diet is actually quite good. But if you're eating, say, 20 or 25 meals a week and maybe 10 of those or 5 of those are really junk meals, a very high percentage of your diet is really not good. So it's all about percentages, and you should try and keep the percentage on the very high end. Hydration is another critical factor, and this is all going to tie in as we move along through this presentation. And on the hydration side, I think one of the important factors to consider is that you need to be drinking the right amount of fluid on a daily basis, and the right amount of fluid for you on a daily basis means around 30 to 40 milliliters of fluid approximately per kilogram of body weight. And it's not in the form of stimulant drinks which act as diuretics. So excessive amounts of coffee, drinks that contain caffeine, or herbal teas, etc. I mean, all of these actually can cause a diuretic effect, so you lose more fluid, which means you actually need to drink a little bit more. So it's just something that you definitely need to take note of. And then meal prioritization. This is something that I quite like to talk about, but I'll keep it short. There are many people that when it comes to meals, they prioritize at the wrong times of the day. So a lot of people make their lunchtime or their dinner time their big meal or their main meal. And when it comes to being an endurance athlete, your main meal is actually your recovery meal. And you really need to think carefully about the kind of session you've done, and we'll talk about that a little bit later when it comes to training and racing and how you're going to recover from it. But that is probably one of the most critical meals when it comes to volume training, especially high intensity training. And then another meal when it comes to prioritization is obviously a pre-race or pre-training meal. If it's required, it obviously depends on the time you're going to train for, etc. So I will get to the training stuff. So those are just that's just some food for thought, things to think about, which definitely play a critical role. When it comes to training nutrition, there are a number of factors that need to be considered when it comes to training. And these factors are the time of the session. So at what time of day are you going to train? Is it a 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the morning session? Is it a session that is in the afternoon? Is it a lunchtime session? And based on that, you will be able to determine the kind of meals that you will be consuming leading up to that session. If it's a very early morning session and it's a pretty short session, chances are you probably won't eat until after that session. However, if it's a late morning session, you might need to eat something beforehand, to keep yourself satiated. Weather conditions, that definitely does determine training nutrition, because if you're going out on a long ride or a long run and it is quite hot and humid, you probably would have to look in at hydration, and you would need to make sure that you consume enough fluid that you stay hydrated through that session. It all depends on the kind of climate that you're training in. The intensity of the training session as well plays a very important role. Any session up to 90 minutes, I believe, doesn't really need much fueling, because your glycogen will be able to, which is your natural carbohydrate stores, will be able to fuel that session quite easily. However, if it's a session that's intense but a very long session, you would probably have to look at deciding what kind of fueling you're going to need during that session. And then the other thing is the length of the training session. So intensity and length play a very crucial role in how you're going to feed before and during. And then another factor you need to take into account, and this is really when I'm dealing with professional athletes, you see this all the time. It's the most critical thing. They might not need to fuel during a session based on the length or the intensity of that session, but they will always look at when are they training next. And it could be a lunchtime session, or it could be a double session or a triple session during the day. And you need to sometimes fuel yourself during a session to ensure that you recover sufficiently for the next session. If you don't recover sufficiently for the next session will not be a quality session, and you might actually end up in a state of fatigue. So that's another consideration that you need to take into account. And then lastly is liquid feed or food solids or both, and that really depends on the kind of person you are. Some people can manage just to go on liquid feed. Some people prefer food solids, and I'll touch on that a little bit later when we deal more with products and race fueling as well. On the recovery side, as an endurance athlete, and I've stressed this before, as meal prioritization, I cannot stress enough how important a recovery meal is. It is very critical, because after any session you need to try and recover. And recovery deals with 4 facets, which I will actually bring up on the next slide. And these are rehydration, so replacement of lost fluid, glycogen replenishment. If you do a very high intensity session and you go out in a fasting session, or even with a very small amount of carbohydrates or food, chances are you will deplete your glycogen stores, not completely necessarily, but definitely a percentage of it. And post exercise, you might want to look at consuming a little bit more of a higher carbohydrate meal in order to be able to assist with that glycogen replenishment, because you need to try and get those glycogen stores back up again, so that they're topped up for the next session. Blood glucose stabilization after a very hard or long session. Definitely sugar loads can exist post-exercise. Again, taking in the correct and appropriate carbohydrates post-exercise will definitely assist you with that. And also, adding some sufficient maybe fats and proteins into a meal in order to make sure that you feel satiated, that you don't actually feel unstable and have any cravings later on during the day. And then lastly, muscle resynthesis, definitely a form of recovery, and protein plays a very critical role in recovery. Not in excessive amounts. You need to consume the right amount of protein for you. And generally for an endurance athlete, I always recommend between 1.4 to 1.7 grams per kilogram of body weight. If you're going to maintain, definitely on the lower end. If you're looking to generate or maybe gain some more lean muscle mass, probably on the higher end of the protein scale. Don't overeat protein, because excess protein does need to be processed. Consuming excessive protein, it does get converted into glucose. It has to be processed, not stored. Once it's converted to glucose, the body will see if it needs to replenish its glycogen stores. If glycogen stores are topped up, that protein that's converted to glucose will just be stored as fat, so it will not be used. So make sure that you consume the right amount. Definitely don't overconsume protein. On the hydration side, I mentioned earlier, you need to try and consume around 30 to 40 milliliters of fluid per kilogram of body weight. It sounds like a lot, but it's actually not. If you weigh 60 kilograms, you're looking at about 2 to 2.5 liters a day. There's nothing wrong with consuming that much. If you think that consuming only in the form of coffee, it's a debate whether coffee is a diuretic or not. Definitely for some people it is more of a diuretic. For some people not as much, but try and stay away from the diuretics and more. Water's there for a reason. Herbal teas are okay. Alcohol is definitely not okay. It does impact performance. It definitely causes dehydration completely. And sugar alcohols actually can impact recovery as well. So that is something just to remember, to take note of. Okay, so when we're talking about training, and even in racing, this is something that I stress to all athletes. You always need to separate your hydration requirements from your energy requirements. And many athletes make this mistake. A lot of athletes make this mistake. And the reason I say that is, if you are going to rely on the bottle for calorie or carbohydrate intake, and you've made up a couple of bottles, and this is what you're going to be consuming in the form of energy, but the day turns out to be quite a little bit cooler than you expected, chances are you will not be getting enough calories from the bottle because you will be consuming far less fluid because you won't be needing to take in the fluid to replace lost fluid. Because it's cooler, you'll be sweating less, you'll be losing less fluid. So it's always important to understand what your hydration and your energy requirements are and try and keep them separate. If it's going to be a very hot day and you're relying on a bottle for calorie intake, well, that's great. I mean, chances are you probably will be on target, but sometimes events start out cold and they only warm up a lot later, and you don't want to be at a calorie deficit early on in the event. So one of the things I have recommended, if you do rely on a fluid feed, is to actually put a concentrate of your calories into a bottle, just like the picture I have there, and you can actually divide it into 4 sections. So know that you need to consume a certain amount per an hour to gain a sufficient amount of carbs or calories per an hour. So that's just one way. So just have that in mind. I still recommend food solids as a way to go, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But a lot of our elite athletes that are racing at a very high intensity prefer to go the bottle route, but there are elite athletes that do use food solids en route, and I will talk about that a little later on. So food solids versus liquids, and this is the debate. Why food solids? And definitely it's much more fuel to the digestive system at once. It's easy to get those calories in. Our bodies are obviously more adapted to eating food solids because every day we do eat food solids. We don't eat liquid diets. It gives us a sense of comfort, hunger, fullness, stability, and also enjoyment. Food solids definitely make it easier in an ultra distance event. When it comes to liquid feeds, there are obviously advantages to taking in liquids, and this is generally due to intensity of the race and breathing patterns. So if you are racing at a very high intensity, eating a food solid is not always easy because you need to keep your airways open. We do design products that are easily chewable that you can bite once and swallow to keep the airways open, which some of the athletes do like, but it really depends on the person. A high pace makes it difficult to chew during an event, and it really does. When it comes to food solids, again, high fiber foods are an issue for some people, so they need to be limited. It can cause GI distress, which is gastrointestinal distress, and high protein as well needs to be limited. So a balance needs to be found, and ultimately, you can find the correct fueling strategy by using both food solids and liquids, or either or. And I'll talk about product fueling in a little while. I get asked very often, and I see a lot of companies promoting how many carbohydrates you should be taking in per an hour when it comes to an endurance event. And generally you hear this 60 to 90 grams of carbohydrates per an hour, which is not a bad average. For most people to take in 60 is quite a fair amount, but in all honesty, it's not about the amount of carbohydrates you consume. It's easy to take in 60 to 90 grams of carbs. However, what is your body capable of absorbing and utilizing? And every single person is different. If you can take in 60 grams of carbs and a friend of yours tries it, it's not necessary to say that it's going to work for him. It's very possible that it's too much for him and he will end up with GI distress, or it might be too little for him. And it really depends on the person. And you do need to train with nutrition to see what your body's tolerance levels are. From my perspective, I know that I can get away in a ultra distance triathlon taking in between 40 to 60 grams of carbs per hour, and that's me personally. In an ultra distance in a running race, probably even a little bit less. And I've seen many elite athletes, ultra runners, that can get away anywhere between 30 to 40 grams of carbs per hour. It really, really depends on the person. And it depends also on what they're consuming, because protein and fat often also come into the mix, and those also provide calories, not in the form of carbohydrates, but obviously in the form of protein and fat. So when we're talking about sports nutrition, something I really need to stress is you must never arrive at any race or even a match without a planned nutrition strategy. And this is probably the biggest mistake that athletes make. I see it all the time. I stand at expos very often, and very often I get asked 3 or 4 days before an event, how should I be feeding myself during the event? And that's really the purpose of this webinar, to try and guide you, because trying to understand what what your nutrition strategy is going to be so close to the event is a very big mistake. It needs to be tested out. It really needs to be tested out. So I think it's very important to try and test it out in training. So that's the first point. And these are rules of engagement that I've put down here. First, always test your nutrition during training. Take notice of what you're consuming during the training in the form of liquids and solids, and also under various weather conditions. Analyze how much fluid you're taking in. Take note of your energy levels before, during, and at the end of your session. Finishing any session strong is a very good sign. Not just of fitness, but if you're consuming food along the way and you're feeling good and comfortable and stable, it's a very good sign as to the nutrition that you're using as well. Once you're satisfied, test it out. And the way I recommend testing it out, especially for a long distance triathlon like a challenge, if we're talking about a full distance, I would say you need to pick a long training session. I would combine that into a long ride, at least a minimum of 3 hours, probably into a brick run, at least 30 to 40 minutes. Wake up in the morning, eat what you would normally eat on race day, and remember, you need to try and consume this meal 2 hours before. So really plan this nutrition training session. Eat a smaller meal if it's closer. So if it's an hour before, maybe half the size of the meal. You don't want to cause any gastric overload. And try and eat what you would on race day. Go out at a fairly hard session on the bike. Eat on the bike as you would during the race. Test it out, and then get off that bike and run at a very, very nice hard pace without taking in anything, and see how you finish that run. If you're feeling strong at the end of that, you can pretty much bank that nutrition program. And I would suggest not just trying it once, but maybe trying it 2 or 3 times just to make sure that you're on the correct track. Okay, the taper period is a very interesting period, and another place where many athletes also make mistakes. And the weeks before the event, you really need to keep the eating clean. The problem is that you've been putting in such high volume training. I mean, most people, especially when it comes to say an iron distance event, they go up to anywhere. Volume can be anywhere between 15 to 25 hours a week, probably for age groupers. Obviously, elites and pros go a little bit higher. But the thing is that when they suddenly start to drop that volume because you're going into taper, very often the appetite doesn't drop and the cravings start to kick in. So you really need to try and focus during the taper weeks on keeping your nutrition very clean. And what I mean by clean is try and limit the amount of takeouts that you're getting. Definitely limit alcohol. It impacts you. Save the alcohol for your post-race victory drink. Avoid caffeine. Now, I haven't put that there to say stop drinking coffee. You'll notice in brackets I've put there caffeine benefit. And the reason I put caffeine benefit is because caffeine has been shown to play a major benefit in an endurance event. But in order to maximize the caffeine benefit, you should be caffeine intolerant. And when I mean intolerant, I don't mean that it impacts you negatively. I mean that you should not be used to caffeine. In other words, consuming it over and over again. The intolerance means that you should be sort of depleted from caffeine. So generally, I would advise athletes, if they really want to benefit from this, to cut out caffeine probably at least 10 days before the event. However, for people that are excessive caffeine drinkers, that people that have 3 to 4 to 5 cups of coffee a day, I would recommend starting the taper of caffeine for a few weeks before that, because otherwise you actually become very agitated and it's not easy. I mean, caffeine is like a drug in a way. It's very difficult to get off it. So you start to reduce the amount of cups, maybe to just 1 a day about 10 days before the event, and then completely cut it out when it comes to those 7 to 10 days before. I did a talk with James Cunningham and Jody Swallow a couple of weeks ago. And one of the things that James Cunningham said was that he only drinks caffeine on 12 days of the year. And the reason he said that was he only races 12 days of the year. He likes to use that benefit, so he cuts caffeine out for the rest of the year. That's a very excessive level to go to, but it's what he does. But many athletes that I do deal with, they start the caffeine reduction about 4 weeks before. In 3 weeks, 3 weeks before, they reduce it even more. And then from 2 weeks onwards, they cut it completely. And then the way to benefit from the caffeine, and the benefit that it does have, is that if you take a large dose of caffeine with your pre-training meal or pre-race meal, about 3 to 4 hours before the event, or even before your meal, it does free up a large amount of free fatty acids in the system, which means that a large amount of natural energy just becomes available. And fat is a very powerful form of energy, and I'll talk a little bit more about it later, but caffeine does have that benefit. The only other benefit it has besides that is that during the event it can keep the brain awake, and it does stimulate the brain a little bit. So it can, and so once the brain's awake, there is a performance benefit. So, but to really benefit from the caffeine beforehand, it's very good to cut it out. Caffeine has one other benefit, and that a lot of people love to hear that from me. It can help replenish glycogen levels by up to 60% faster if consumed immediately post-exercise with a complex carbohydrate. So maybe 2 or 3 espressos with a rolled oats meal would be a good idea, but it does help with glycogen replenishment. So caffeine does have a benefit. Try and eat normal and healthy balanced meals. Don't overeat during the taper period because you don't want to gain weight. One of the problems that many athletes face is they arrive at race day maybe even a kilo or 1.5, 2 kilos heavier than they were before they started their taper. That's a lot of weight to carry around. 3.8 kilometer swim, maybe not, but definitely a 180 kilometer bike and a 42 kilometer run. I can guarantee you that carrying extra weight with you will probably land up tiring you, causing cramps, and probably also risking injury. You need to try and maintain a race weight, and nutrition is the way to do it. There's a big debate around carbo loading, and just to touch on that, I'm not a fan of carbo loading. I don't believe in it. When you go into taper phase and you reduce your volume of training, you really don't chew up much glycogen. Your glycogen levels are pretty much topped up because you're actually feeding yourself quite regularly. So as the volume drops and you carry on eating consistently, you'll still be maintaining your glycogen levels. The carbo loading is really there just to top up your glycogen. But if in a taper period, if you're eating normally, you will top up those glycogen levels significantly. And I don't see a reason for overeating, because again, it just leads to weight gain, and I don't believe in that. So carbo loading is not something that you really need to do. And if you don't eat a very high carbohydrate diet, there's no reason to go and overeat carbs the week before an event. The day before the event, again, keep the eating clean, hydrate properly. Hydration is so important. Make sure you're taking those 30 to 40 mils of per kilogram of body weight per day. You definitely do not want to arrive at any ultra distance race dehydrated or even not 100% hydrated. And hydration doesn't mean you've got fluid sitting in the digestive system. It means that your muscles are completely hydrated and it's sitting in there. And that's where you need to be. Avoid caffeine definitely the day before the event. Definitely do not touch it. You want to try and sleep well. You don't want to be agitated. If you really want to benefit from caffeine, stay away from it. You'll enjoy it the next day with your pre-race meal. Your large meal should probably be your lunchtime meal, and most pro athletes will tell you the same thing. A lot of people tend to overeat at dinner time the night before a race. Bad mistake, because if you overfill yourself at dinner, you will not sleep properly. You already got pre-race nerves. You're already feeling agitated and feeling discomfort while you're lying in bed with a heavy stomach and your digestive system trying to function. You will find it very difficult to sleep before the night of a race. So your lunchtime meal can be your larger meal. It doesn't have to be an excessively large meal, but it definitely can be a larger meal. Dinner meal would be a small and comfortable meal. I mean, I know for myself, I mean, I have a vegetable omelette usually the night before a big race. I don't really have major carbs. I know a lot of people that have very little carbs and they're just trying to eat something that's small and comfortable the night before. The next morning, your pre-race meal is far more critical. Focus on sleep. And expo time is something that I just want to mention. I see a lot of athletes that walk around expos all the time, shopping, etc. It's all wonderful, but try and stay focused and make sure that if you are walking around the expo, you have got a bottle of water in your hand or you are hydrating on something, because that is a time where a couple of hours can go by and you're actually not hydrating yourself and maybe even skipping meals. So make sure that you're keeping your energy levels topped up and you are hydrating if you're walking around an expo. When it comes to the actual race day, and this is where we'll get into suggested fueling, your meal should be taken in at least 2 hours or more before the event. And anything closer than 2 hours is a little bit too close to the event. that meal needs to be digested and absorbed and utilized for the event, and 2 hours before is sufficient. If it's 2 hours before, you need to aim for a meal of around 400 calories. It should be carb, protein, and fat combination. You can make it a higher carb portion, but keep it to stability carbohydrates. There is no need to spike your blood sugar before an ultra distance event whatsoever. There's just no reason for it. The pace that you're racing an ultra distance event is not excessively high intensity. It's not just a marathon on its own. It's not just a cycle race or an Olympic distance triathlon. It really is not a high intensity event. It's more of a controlled intensity. A large portion of that event is going to be fueled not just by your glycogen stores but your fat stores. And if you spike your blood sugar early on, you will suffer the pains of the sugar highs and the sugar lows, and it impacts the brain. It does lead to nausea, and it leads to a really, really frustrating day out. So try and keep to stability carbs. And when I talk about stability carbs, I talk about low GI or low glycemic index carbs. In other words, carbohydrates that do not spike blood sugar excessively. And those carbs can be anything from quinoa to a rolled oats, not a processed oats. I've given some options of meals there. I've even given options of a smoothie, which actually involves one of our recover shakes. And I mean, even eggs on toast is actually a decent meal with protein in that. There are a lot of athletes that do that, but these are just some ideas. If you do have any questions and you want to send us emails for advice, etc., because obviously we do not understand everybody's food tolerances and what their likes and dislikes are, I mean, you feel free to email us and we can assist. So when it comes to the race feeling itself, it's going to really depend entirely on your pace and time. Just as an example, I mean, any race that is under 90 minutes, I mean, or any time under 90 minutes, you can easily fuel on your glycogen stores alone. But as the race grows longer, so 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, you want to try and spare that glycogen as much as possible. And you want to try and save those glycogen stores for much later on. And the way to do that in an ultra distance event is to actually pace yourself. And if you're pacing yourself, in other words, your breathing is controlled, and you're able to breathe controlled, you are able to tap into your fat stores as a source of energy, because fat is only converted eventually into glucose and into ATP when there's oxygen in your system. So I'm getting a little bit technical now, but the thing is that your fat stores are extremely important when it comes to ultra distance or endurance fueling. And by the minute you start to spike your blood sugar excessively, you start to mitigate your body's ability to utilize the fat stores. And the reason I say that is because the body will want to utilize the glucose in the system. So there's two ways of fueling. Either you can flood your body with glucose, but then you really need to go at a decent pace to get rid of that glucose in your system. And that's obviously by eating high carbohydrates or blood sugar spiking carbs during an event. The second way is to try and eat stability carbohydrates, so your blood sugar levels are not spiked significantly, but your body will be able to utilize a combination of blood glucose and also fat when it requires. And it's much less painful, because if your glucose in your blood is sitting at a very high level and you're not performing at a very high pace to utilize that blood sugar, what's going to happen is eventually that blood sugar is going to grow and grow and grow. The amounts that you consume are going to increase it, and eventually you are going to feel absolutely terrible. And that's when nausea sets in. And I've seen many athletes where we've done blood venous at the end of an event, where they cross the finishing line and we take blood samples, and their blood sugar is over 9. And if you finish a race and your blood sugar is over 9 or over 10, that is a very high blood sugar to finish an ultra distance event, and it should never be that high. So the thing is that you need to know what to consume, and this will definitely be determined by your pace and time. Again, liquid and solid feed, or both. We've spoken about that earlier. You need to decide how you want to fuel yourself, what liquids to take, what solids to take, and if you can handle solids, and if you would prefer a liquid. I always believe that liquid feeds are obviously much more, they're easier when everything's in a bottle, but also you can get tired of it, and sometimes you do need to eat something in a long event. So sometimes a solid feed is good, and sometimes to chew on something does help. And then you've got to decide if you want to utilize caffeine during the event. Caffeine is immeasurable. You need to understand how many milligrams of caffeine you will require and at what intervals, and And I know, like, if we're talking about some of our athletes, I think James takes 120 milligrams of caffeine per an hour, if I'm not mistaken. I think that was discussed with him. There's some athletes that take 60 milligrams per an hour. There's some athletes that only take caffeine towards the end of an event. So maybe on the run, maybe in the second half of the run, or only during the run, they start the caffeine intake, and they do not take it in earlier. And then there's a protein option, and this is something I'm a very big fan of. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So whether you're going to consume protein during an event or not, and it is something that we do recommend. So 32GR has developed a fueling guide, and just by the way, I will actually post the link to download this guide. I actually had what we've discussed today. I've actually asked one of my graphic designers to upload it to a website so that we can actually give you the option of downloading. It's a fueling guide for challenge, and you guys can download it in a PDF format, and it will review every single thing that I've discussed in this presentation, but in far more detail. In actual fact, I'll send it to Mikkel now so he can actually post it. I'll send him the link. So if you look at the fueling guide, there's a few things you need to consider. The intensity that you're going to be racing at. Is it a high intensity? Is it a controlled pace? Or is it a combination of both? And if it is, that will still determine your fueling strategy. High intensity requires quicker feeds. Controlled pace requires more stability feeds. A combination of both. Maybe if you start off at a controlled pace and then eventually you go into a high intensity pace, you might want to start off with a controlled feed and then up the intensity. As the intensity ups, you want to give yourself a quicker feed. Your preference, food solids, liquid energy, and both. We've spoken about that. And then also, how many grams of carbs are you wanting to take in per an hour? So is it 40 to 60, 60 to 70, greater than 70? And you need to understand the products that you are taking, how you're going to split that up, and how you're going to feed yourself over that hour. This is just a little guide I've done in a controlled pace, performance requirements. And this is something that I've done as a guide. It doesn't necessarily mean this is the be-all and end-all that you have to stick to, but this is really for somebody that doesn't like taking an energy drink, because some people, they don't like sports drinks because of the flavor and the taste that stays in the palate. So this is just food solids plus water, and I've just given an idea of how you could use some of our products with water and how often at regular intervals. So you'll see, because there's no calories in a water bottle and because you're relying on calories in the form of food solids, your frequency of consumption is a lot higher. And you'll see these signs, 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. It's called drip feeding. And the more frequently you feed, the easier it is on the digestive system, and also over an hour period, it's easier to get that amount of calories in. I do not believe in feeding yourself only once an hour. I believe you should be feeding yourself every 20 to 30 minutes in an ultra distance event. And the reason I say that is it's easier on the digestive system, and it keeps the peaks and troughs of your energy system a lot closer together. So there's less instability. If the peaks and troughs are too far apart, by the time you reach a period of hunger or a period of lack of energy, it is really a little bit too late to actually get that into your system, and you are going to feel terrible at that stage. When it comes to a sports drink plus food solids, you'll see I've given some options over there as well, where the timing is spread out a little bit more because now you're relying on the bottle, and I've incorporated some fueling options over there. And by the way, this is available, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but if you do have any questions around this, you are welcome to contact us. If you're going at a high intensity, and I mean really, this is, when I say high intensity, your breathing is actually more uncontrolled. And when I say uncontrolled, I mean that it's you're puffing and panting. You won't be able to speak. That's what I determine to be high intensity, when you're not getting enough oxygen into the system. At that stage, you might want to go more for a liquid feed, but I have provided a liquid and a solid feed. And in this case, you'll probably look at more of the gel and sort of a high intensity, high carbohydrate feed. And our two products that we've got differ in the amount of carbs that exist in them. So this is just a high intensity performance chart as well. And obviously at a high intensity, your carbohydrate intake will probably be slightly higher. And then I spoke about the protein option earlier. And what has been proven with carbohydrates is that, and protein, is that by consuming protein, a percentage of protein per an hour in an endurance event, you can delay the onset of muscle fatigue by up to 29%. And It's been shown in the States. They've been using Olympic swimmers and actually some triathletes, some testing's been done, and I've read the scientific research on it, and so we've actually been using this fueling strategy with a lot of our elite athletes, but we take protein in the form of a liquid. So what we recommend is that you cycle between your carbohydrate fluid and intake and your protein intake. And generally, what the athletes will do, and it's what we recommend, is we put maybe 4 to 6 scoops of protein into a bottle, concentrated with liquid. So it's a very small bottle. It's a concentrate of it. And what they do is they rotate their intake, their fluid intake. So they'll take 3 to 4 sips from the carbohydrate bottle, and then maybe 1 from the protein bottle, and they cycle that through the race. The benefit of protein is twofold. Not only does it assist in the delay on the onset of muscle fatigue and fatigue, it keeps the hunger at bay, and it also tastes quite nice. So its protein is different to carbohydrates. It's not the same sweetness and not the same taste. So it actually provides you a little bit more stability, and by keeping the hunger at bay and providing you that stability, and also helping with the delaying of fatigue, it actually can play a benefit. And many athletes that I've worked with over the years have tried cycling some protein into their endurance events, and it does work very well. It's something that I personally have tried and tested in many ultra endurance events, and it works very well. In actual fact, on some of my long rides, which are 5 or 6 hours, I actually only take protein and I only take water. There are carbohydrates in the protein. We actually use a 1-to-3 protein to carbohydrate ratio. So a single serving, which is 4 scoops, actually provides you close to 50 grams of carbs and probably around 18 grams of protein in a serving. So you're still getting the carbohydrate intake even when you're drinking from the bottle. However, you are getting a percentage of protein in. And if you can get that percentage around 5 to 7% per an hour, I would say that you're sitting in a very good space. On the bike course, and this is not final, I mean, these are the 32 GI products that are actually going to be en route, and these will be clarified, but the gels, don't worry about the flavors. There are going to be other flavors as well. I know passion fruit, for example, there's definitely a fruit flavor that's going to be sitting at some of the aid stations. There are food bars that are some of the aid stations. I think they've left out the chews here, and we'll clarify that, but there definitely should be some chews sitting at some of these aid stations as well. And we will be providing Endure drink, and there will also be water at the aid stations on the bike. The bike course will have aid stations at the 30-kilometer mark, again at the 75, the 120 and 165, and then also 92 and 137. So there are definitely sufficient aid stations en route, and there will definitely be enough product for you to be able to grab should you lose a bottle, or should you require any food, or if you need to pick me up from a gel, or you need some food solids. We will have plenty available on course, and you shouldn't see any shortage whatsoever. If you've got any queries around products or questions around the products themselves, again, feel free to contact us. We do have a global address, which I will give you at the end of the presentation. On the run course, again, there are aid stations, and here we've got a few salty cracks as well, and I think the reason is that a lot of people feel that they need to take in a bit of extra salt maybe on the run course. So there are some salty cracks. There is a little bit of more sugar on the course, obviously water, some bananas, and then we will have some chews, some food bars as well as gels, and we'll put in a different flavored drink as well on the run route. Maybe at different tables we'll have different flavors, but again, so it doesn't make it monotonous. When you're grabbing a drink and you're tired of one flavor, you know, it's nice to sometimes switch to another, so that it doesn't get too monotonous. On the run, there are aid stations at the 3.5 kilometer mark, at the 8 and the 10 kilometer, and there's also a 1.5 kilometer mark aid station, and at the 5 kilometer. So there is plenty of aid stations en route. It's obviously a lap course, and again, there won't be a shortage as far as food goes on course. If there are any questions relating to this, you know, like I said, feel free to contact us. The global info address is info@32gi.com. you're welcome to send us an email to info32gr.com, and we can forward it to the relevant region if you need help in a local language as well. I myself will be in Denmark during this period, so if you want to come and chat to me or ask any questions, I think if I'm not mistaken, we will be doing a live presentation or a live talk during the week of Challenge Denmark. So I will be available to take any questions, and I just want to I'll close this off and thank you very much for your time. If there are any questions, I can't see any, but you can ask through the chat. I'm just going to bring Mikkel on as well. I don't know if he's if there's anybody that has asked any questions at all. Mikkel, are you there?
I'm absolutely here, and I'm pleased to hear that you're still here attending the webinar. And maybe I can just add to what you're saying, Mark, that we will of course be there all race week, all from Wednesday till Saturday, where the race is going on. And you are so much welcome seeing us at the expo, where you can have a more detailed insight into the products. There will be lots of sampling. You can try out and taste any product you like, and get into the details. And of course, we will also be able to have an in-depth chat with you guys being there, and maybe even doing a more formal seminar as well. But also at the expo, there will be put up posters like the ones that we've shown you on the screen here, explaining what is exactly at each aid station, what kind of flavors, what kind of products, where is the water, where is the different things. So you will be able to understand all the details. It will be put up at the aid stations, and it will also be in the booklet that will be sent out to you guys on an email not far from now. I think it's going to be a few days, and then so of course we're just going to wish you a wonderful race.
Mikkel, can I ask you a favor? Can you post that link so they can download that brochure so that they've got it on screen?
I would need to, I think probably best is going to post it on the Challenge Denmark Facebook site, and I will ask the Challenge guys to actually post it as soon as they can. I think they had some Facebook problems actually during today, but it will be posted as soon as possible from now.
Okay, so I think tomorrow.
Yeah, sure. I can post it. Yeah, let me post it on the. Yeah, I could potentially post it on here as well. Let me try, but definitely we will put it on the Challenge Denmark website or Facebook site. Sorry.
Okay, and this so this webinar, I'm going to upload it to the 32GR YouTube channel tomorrow, and then we will link it to all the sites so that you are available to so that it is available for download and for listening.
Actually, now we got a question, Mark. I don't know if you see it, but there's a question related to a concrete example of how to make it work with 2 bottle cages on the bike and all the different fluids. Being very pragmatic around the bottle and the energy, how to make it work that way.
Look, I think the important thing to note is that there are going to be bottles en route of energy drink and water. So if you run out of fluid and you need to toss that bottle from your bottle cage, you can easily take on another bottle en route. So that's the first thing. If I only had 2 bottle cages, what I would actually recommend is that in one of those bottle cages you probably keep if you're relying on a liquid feed, you keep a concentrated amount of carbohydrates and fluid that you can sip on frequently, and then use the other one more for just hydration purposes to keep your hydration levels up, and not to worry so much about the carbohydrate intake and really worry about the one fluid. I would still carry some. The question I think is, are you going to have any solids with you, or is it just a liquid feed? You can definitely manage on just 2 bottle cages for sure. To be quite honest, most of the athletes I deal with also only have 2 bottle cages, because one, they use a tool bottle where they're keeping their spares, etc. So the other option is, if you do want a third one, you can put an aero bottle on the front to make it 3. But if you've only got 2 bottles, if it's a liquid feed, definitely concentrated liquid in the one bottle, hydration for the other. As that finishes, you need to pick up more fluid en route. And if you're not so worried about from a concentrated liquid point of view, and you're relying on food solids, then 2 bottles for hydration, and you've got more time to pick up bottles en route. So I think it would be pretty easy to manage. I mean, they are frequent, the bottles that are en route, from what I can understand. I hope that answers the question, Soren. I hope it answers the question. Okay, I don't know if there's any more questions.
It answers the question, yes.
Okay, all right, that's great. So I'm going to close off this webinar. Thank you very much for attending. I look forward to meeting all of you. I'm going to be in Denmark. I'm going to be in Israel. I'm also going to be in Roth in Germany. So if you need to get hold of me, if you need to discuss anything with me, I will make myself available. Mika will be available as well, and we look forward to seeing you on race day. And just remember, you need to get there in good shape and healthy. So look after yourselves and keep training hard, and we'll see you soon. Thank you very much.